Now, the type of philosophy presented to us by both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche is something that was popularized later on by a fellow by the name of Jean-Paul Sartre as existentialism. So these two figures are, we consider them to be proto-existentialists, right? Now, what they want to claim, right, is that wildly distinct to what we've seen before in this course that we're studying right now. All of the figures that we've seen before have tried to define human beings apart from their context, apart from their situations, apart from any content of our lives. When we try to define a human being or human nature, right, what we do is we abstract away from the existing individual, you and I, right, anything that's particular to us, right? So human nature wouldn't care that it's Sunday, right? Human nature wouldn't care that I'm Canadian. Human nature wouldn't care that I'm white, I'm male, I'm Irish Catholic, I'm slightly balding, I'm about 6'1", and I'm wearing a black turtleneck. When we come up with a definition, it's important to realize that the way that we define is an abstraction, right? So the further we get away from an actual case of an existing individual, the more abstract and, in fact, content-less the definition of human beings are, right? Now, we saw this with Plato, we saw this with Aristotle, we saw this to a certain extent with Hobbes as well, right? Even before the human being finds themselves in a concrete situation, we are something, right? In terms of Plato, we are this sort of admixture of raw desire, temperance or self-control, and reason, right? Again, in terms of Aristotle, we saw that even before we exist, we have a function. So when we come into the world, we are simply actualizing our potential or performing our function with certain degrees of success or not, right? Again, in Hobbes, insofar as there's a human nature, human beings are governed by this restless desire for power after power that ceases only in death, right? So in a certain sense, right, these attempts to understand a human being, right, sort of project for us an essence or a definition, right, that each and every one of us, insofar as we're human, exhibit, right, in our own particular ways, right? Now, what both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are going to present us with is an idea that rather than essence preceding existence, right, or rather than us already being defined even before we come into the world, even before we appear on the scene, rather the inverse is true. Existence precedes essence, right? Or this is I'm oversimplifying here, I'm using Sartre's terminology, but nonetheless, another way of putting this is that we are free, we're subjects that are kind of thrown into a world, and through our actions and through our choices as an expression of our freedom, right, only in that manner do we become something, and through that sort of activity we wind up defining ourselves, right? It's impossible for a human being to say what they are because they're not done becoming whatever they are quite yet, right? We only become something through this sort of free action, through free choices, right? Now, the reason that I've picked these two figures for you, Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, is I used to only teach the Nietzsche section, right? Because Nietzsche is an interesting criticism of everything that's come before him. But well, what these two figures represent are two different sort of spheres, two different kinds of existentialism. All right. Kierkegaard is going to present us with a very Christian, religious kind of existentialism, and Nietzsche, right, is famous for claiming that God is dead. Right? So Nietzsche represents the irreligious kind of existentialist. Right? Now, the reason I present these two figures sort of in tandem with one another, right, is because, well, essentially 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Right? What do I mean by that? Well, if these figures are right, and I can call them existentialists, if existence precedes essence, right, basically, you believe in God, you don't believe in God, you're in essentially the same position. Right? If we are free and kind of thrown into the world, right, if we are in a situation where we have to make choices, and those choices define us and produce for us an essence, if you believe in God, right, then, well, first off, you've chosen to believe in God. Secondly, you've chosen to, in a sense, adopt this religious institutional mindset that then frames the various choices that you make, and then you actually have to choose those choices. Right? So, right, essentially, for the religious existentialist, we're thrown into the world and asked, as beings who have relatively little understanding of what's going on around them, right, to make sense of themselves, to make sense of their basic situation, and to make sense of their choices in the world. Right? So even if God appeared to you in a white poof of smoke and said, "I'm God, the way you should live is this way," we would have a series of choices to make. First off, to believe that this weird figure who just appeared in a white poof of smoke is God. Secondly, to listen to him. Thirdly, we would have to interpret what this being told us. And fourthly, we would, based on that interpretation, have to make a series of particular choices that define our lives. Right? However, if God doesn't exist, right, in any way that's useful to us, as Nietzsche claims, right, then we're thrown into the world. We have to make choices. We have to establish for ourselves values, or choose to accept the values that are there within our society as it is, right? A moral code, that sort of thing. So in either case, we're essentially alone with our choices, whether we believe in God or we don't believe in God, right? Essentially, it's the same situation for the existing individual. Now, what Nietzsche and Kierkegaard are going to present for us are, well, two arguments, right? Kierkegaard is going to argue that the Christian religious way of understanding the world, right, is pretty well the best, most useful, and most fully human way of doing it, right? So what Kierkegaard is going to do is try to rescue religion, right? Now, Nietzsche, an essentially religious thinker, I mean, his father was a pastor, and he was raised in a very devout kind of family. He grew up with basically the same level of religious upbringing that Kierkegaard was. What Nietzsche concludes is that, well, these values, right, and Christianity as an institution, right, have become bankrupt. Right? These values, we've in a sense stopped believing in them because they no longer work for us. They no longer do what we need to do. So, while Kierkegaard claims that Christianity can be, in a sense, rescued, and we can relate to it in a way that's going to help us live our lives, what Nietzsche claims is that we are going to need to, in a sense, overcome this 2,000-year-old form of dogma and create a new way of thinking about ourselves and the world around us, right, that reflects our human needs, right, our human biological, natural needs, right? So what Nietzsche is going to do is become highly critical of all philosophy that's come before him. What Kierkegaard is going to do is, in a sense, while being critical of the philosophy that's come before him, he's going to present a case for Christianity, right? And he's going to start this with, like I say, one of the weirdest definitions for the self or human subjectivity that I've ever seen.